Welcome to Get Motivated with Donato, a show designed to reach you where you are, focusing on the fact that you can be anything that you want and desire. All you have to do is get motivated. If you need a challenge in your life, then look no further. Get Motivated with Donato starts now.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Get Motivated with Donato here, and I'm your host, Dr. Donato. I've got with me today David, and I'm so excited to hear from David today because he's just got such an interesting background for us to learn about, and another triumphant story. We're kind of pushing the triumphant story here lately, and that's what I want to talk about. So welcome, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Donato. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And pronounce your last name. Is it Ammons?
Ammons.
Ammons.
Yes.
Ammons. All right. So welcome again to the program. And, just to get started here today, I want to ask you just the regular icebreaker question that I ask everybody else. If you could meet anybody, past or present, who would that be and why?
Oh, that's a good question. If I could meet anyone, past or present, there's so many possibilities to that answer.
There is.
One for me, of course, would be Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. He walked on he came into the world, and just what he was like, and to see him. If I were to bring it a little more modern, maybe even American history, I would like to meet George Washington and what he went through, and the trials and tribulations and everything that they went through. It was really a long shot that they were going to win, even in the Revolutionary War. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. But they never stopped. They kept pushing, just like we talk about in Triumphant, right? They probably have a lot of good triumphant stories.
Oh, man, can you imagine?
Yeah, we did a triumphant of all the colonials, right?
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, or I remember hearing a story about a soldier in the British Army, I guess, that had a shot on General, George Washington, and because he was an officer, that wouldn't have been proper for him to take the shot. So he didn't. Right. But think about if he did. If he just said, oh, hey, it's an American guy, I want to shoot him, how much different our country would be.
Right.
It's just those interesting little things about history and events and stuff like that. This one little change, happens.
Right. The ripple effect, right?
Yep. And that's kind of how our triumphant stories are, right?
Right.
Any little thing can happen in our lives. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to react or respond, right?
Right.
Reacting is just the gut nature, like first thing, and, you're not thinking about it. Or are you going to take the time to work through it and to think about it and to be, I don't know, like methodical, right? To get out of that situation.
Sure.
And instead of digging a further deep hole because you reacted. And I think that's a lot of times what we do. So that's where the show Get Motivated comes in for me is I want to inspire people. I want to get them motivated to get up off the couch, right?
Right.
And do something, right? I think we should always be learning and growing. And it's not that we're not going to have life happen. Of course we are. It's how are we going to manage that and get out of it, right? So with that in mind, what does get motivated mean to you?
Oh, my goodness. I think I am a pretty good guest for you for Get Motivated podcast, because, my story that's going to show in Triumphant is somewhat of an excerpt of the full chapter that I'm going to include in my book coming up sometime in the fall, called "It's a Matter of Motivation,"
Oh,
and
nice.
it's all the stories of things that's happened to me. And that little saying was something that kind of just came to me when I was in a bad place in my professional life. I just came back in the Army, and I was administratively reduced, and I was brought down to, a much lower rank, kind of starting over.
Mm.
And, like what's going to happen now in my career? Am I going to even get back to where I was at all? But that saying, "It's a matter of motivation," was something that came to me to say, you can, however you get promoted. I had, chosen a really hard promoting job when I came back in the Army, and like, how am I going to even be able to get back where I was, in this? And that saying, "It's a matter of motivation," is really the case, right? And of course, the other part of "It's a matter of motivation" is what motivates you, right? Are you motivated to take care of your family? And you motivated to take care of your
Yeah.
friends? Are you motivated for good things? That's also part of being motivated as well. But that's why I'm glad to be on the Get Motivated podcast, because it's so important that, and you'll see throughout all the triumphant stories that you just can't stop. You pause. You have to pause, because you have to. There's a number one rule in when you find yourself in a hole. The number one rule is stop digging, right? When you find yourself in a hole. Okay. So you have
That's a
to
good
pause.
point.
Yeah. So you have to pause, and take a collection, take a what's going on here, what am I doing wrong, whatever. But you don't stop. You basically pause, orient yourself, and then move, go. And so that's, kind of something that's come to me in my life, and that's why I'm glad to be on the Get Motivated podcast.
I love it. I love it. When you're in a hole, stop digging. Like, start building a ladder and get out of it, right?
Right,
That's
right.
awesome. So, yeah, no, hey, thanks for that. I appreciate that. So, you know, Triumphant is the new book that we're in. It's so awesome. I always like to talk about the tests in our lives, those issues, those problems that turn into our testimonies, right? Because we stopped digging and we got out of the hole and we turned our life around, Um, or again, yeah, just life happens. I mean, things happen, right?
Right,
We're not gonna, not pretend that it doesn't. It does.
right, right, right,
Um, and it's just a matter of what you do to get out of that situation, or how God moved in your life, or all of these different things, right? And we're to take that testimony, which is that end product, like, this is how we did it, and share that with the world, right? Share that with everyone that can use the help, right? We all need
right,
help,
right,
and we shouldn't be afraid to ask for it, no matter how young, old, whatever we are, right? We all need it.
right.
And I've always tried to learn from other people's mistakes in life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
That's the best way.
yeah,
Right. Learn from their
exactly.
mistakes. Right.
Yeah, because you'll make enough of your own too.
Right.
So I'd like to hear more about your backstory. I've got a few things here that I saw in your chapter that I wanted to discuss too, but share with us your backstory and this about this chapter especially.
Okay. Okay. So thank you. I'm originally from Chester, Virginia, which is south of Richmond, Virginia, and I'm
Okay.
the youngest of six children, to Roy and Mary Ellen Ammons, and I grew up in the same house my father grew up in. So we're longtime Virginians. I went to the same high school my parents went to. My mother's class wrote our high school alma mater and our high school fight song that I was still singing when I was in high school.
Wow.
And, so that's kind of my history of being in Virginia. And most of my family is still in that area of Virginia, maybe Maryland, mostly in that part of the country. But I was in high school and just kind of figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And right when I was in that state, a recruiter walked into my store. I was working at McDonald's. That was my first job. And
there.
there you go. Right. Okay. And, I remember we had to memorize the ingredients of the Big Mac in case we were asked, and if we couldn't say it, they would jump on us, right? Big Mac, 2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, on the sesame seed bun.
Good job.
Yeah. So anyway, a recruiter came in to my McDonald's and just started talking to me. He looked sharp and he just told me some good things, and I saw it as a way at the time. Originally, it was just a way I could maybe get some college money. And my parents worked. My father was a teacher. My mother didn't work, and didn't have like a whole lot of money, but we were fine, comfortable. But I was just trying to figure out how I was going to do that, what I was going to do with my life. And so I joined the Army, and when you go off into another arena, other things start to happen, and other decisions are made. I was a young man and ended up eventually in Panama, and Republic of Panama, and during the Noriega years, and it was, we were kind of, and you tend to draw closer in communities when you're constantly under possibility of war, Yeah. And anyway, I went to the chapel, and that's where I met my wife, who was a soldier. She was a chaplain assistant, and that's when we got married. I started having a family with her. Of course, then I stayed in. I re-enlisted and stayed in longer, and just continued my career. It is a lot more about my Army career that just kept going, but a lot of moves, and there's a lot of stories to my moves. Some of those were the Army. Speed up and just fast forward. After I retired, we still had a couple more moves in us, and one was a blessing for us to go to Alaska. It was a job I was able to take and live up there, and we loved it. But we knew once we were up there, we knew we weren't going to stay up there. It was more just a kind of a treat. It was like we had prayed about being able to go, and the doors open for us to go. We thought we were going to stay for like 3 years. We ended up staying 7. But while we were up there, that last year, we knew, okay, it's time to go back. We just knew it. And it's my story in Triumphant was about our trip back. I mean, we were very confident that we were supposed to go back and where we were supposed to go. And so we're like, okay, well, everything is set for that. We're going to go to this place, which was be moved to Fort Worth, Texas, not to the house that I still owned in Temple, Texas, that I moved to Alaska from. I still owned it. I was renting it out.
Wow.
But we were going to Fort Worth, and that's where we were really strongly felt to go. And there's stories behind it, and there's a connection to the reason that we were going to Fort Worth, Texas. But so when everything's set up, and you're like, okay, I know this is definitely a word, and we prayed and we heard from God and everything. Okay, this is gonna be great. And then we go there, and things didn't work out right away, And so now what do you do? What do you do about it? And so that's kind of my, that is a little teaser to what my story, a prep to what my story is about. And a lot of things happen just, kind of odd and crazy. And, whenever I hear people's stories and testimonies, and I'm so looking, haven't read all the stories from Triumphant. I'm looking forward to reading them all. But I get,
It's always impressive.
Right. When when a woman has a miscarriage and what she went through and how she came out of that depression, that's not going to happen to me.
Right.
But how she dealt with the bad news, is going to help me. That's still going to help me. And
and seeing how God moved in her life, how she, prayed and got the out. Yeah. I mean, I interview all kinds of people on this show, and it is amazing to hear some of those testimonies and to see the way, God shows up, especially because that's usually what it is. I mean, I'm a pastor, so it's kind of natural for me to talk about God stuff.
Right.
I don't do it a lot on the show unless it just comes up, and a lot of times it does come up.
Right.
So, like you mentioned, Jesus was one of the people you wanted to see. And
yes.
I mean, yeah, of course. Who wouldn't want to walk with Jesus, right?
Right.
And then, we talked a little bit like with George Washington, those events that happened.
Right.
You mentioned you were in the Army. I grew up with a World War II Master Sergeant for a father.
Right.
So I knew when I was a little kid, I'm going into the military, right?
Right.
There was no question. And then life happens. I broke my leg. It didn't heal right, and I couldn't go in. So that little event changed the outcome for my life.
Right.
Now, did it save me? Because maybe I would have gotten killed in the Gulf War or something. Who knows?
Right.
Things happen. Sometimes we don't understand why they happen. We may never know. The thing is, what are we going to do to get out of it, right? And all of these trials and tribulations that we go through, we have to have something to lean on, right? We have to have God in our lives. We have to have good friends. We got to have somebody that can mentor us, that can say, hey, I went through this. Not all hope is lost. You can get out. Here's the way. Stop digging. Right? I love it.
Right.
And one of the things that I saw in your chapter, which I just thought was crazy, because like I've had some interviews, but holy buckets, man. You talk about having an interview process of 6 hours.
Right.
I mean, talk about that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, so part of this move, and we felt so confident to be able to move, originally, of course, back to Texas. That's where we had left from, and we just, knew we were going to go there. And I mentioned we left from a town called Temple, and I still owned that house, and I was renting it out. So naturally, you would think I'll just go back to the house I owned. But we, really felt, we didn't feel to go back there. We didn't, we'd been there and kind of smaller town, and we looked at different places in Texas, and said, wow, Dallas Fort Worth, that would be kind of neat. And, kind of pretty, and seemed like, okay, that seems like the way it's going. So at this point, and part of a little side story, when I went to Alaska, one of the things that happened in the move to Alaska was a complete new beginning. It's the last frontier is one of the nicknames of Alaska.
Yeah.
And you can really, if you take advantage of the beautiful nature and everything that Alaska has to offer, it also can offer new beginnings, and which it was for me, because I decided at that point, I had mentioned my father was a teacher, and he passed away kind of suddenly about now. It's like, 19 years ago, no, 27 years ago now. I'm like, wow. But it was very sudden, and I wanted to honor his memory, and I knew it was in me, that there was something, that was a calling for me to be a teacher, and I knew it wasn't the kids. I had to be, so I knew I needed to get my my doctorate to be able to be a professor. So the time I was in Alaska, part of the thing about being in Alaska was I got my doctorate up there. So once I got my PhD in Alaska, I was working for University of Alaska at Anchorage and Central Texas College, a couple other schools up there. And, of course, as I'm looking, a year in advance, it wasn't just like, oh, let's go next week. Things don't work out that way. But about a year in advance, I started submitting some applications and to some colleges. And one of those colleges was TCU in Fort Worth. So that was, so as my wife and I decided, let's just go down there and go and just look at houses, in that area. And my son had been in Dallas Fort Worth. He goes, go to Fort Worth. You'd rather go there. Okay. So we're in Fort Worth, and we're at a hotel. We're going to look for houses. And I get an email in the hotel, like just checking my computer, my laptop, as we're kind of looking, really checking it to hear from my real estate agent, that I had there. But as I'm checking it, I see an email pops in from TCU that they wanted to interview me. I'm like, what? It was an application that I had forgotten about. It was like 9 months to a year prior that I had submitted it. And I'm physically in Fort Worth, and part of the interview, when I reached out to them to respond, they said, we're trying to figure out how we can fly you down. We got to do the logistics of it, but we're trying, because, I had my Alaska address on my resume.
Sure.
And I said, well, you're not going to believe this, but I'm actually in Fort Worth, like right now. Right now, I'm in a hotel in Fort Worth. And so they scrambled to set up an interview with me, like with it while I'm in a hotel traveling. Like I had to go to a store and buy clothes. I didn't have the clothes for an interview. I had to go buy all that stuff, and they
Right,
wanted me
yeah,
to do a
you
class.
don't bring your suit with you when you're just figuring
Right,
stuff out.
right. And so I had to go get a suit. I had to do a little class for them. I mean, this was an interview. This was something I haven't seen before or since. They had me come in. They wanted me to meet the whole team, it was, my specialty, or my PhD is in business administration. My specialty is supply chain, logistics, operations management. That's my experience in military. I'm a retired Chief Warrant Officer 3. I manage motor pools, fleet management, things like that. So I know logistics really well, and that's kind of my specialty. That I've broke. I'm a Lean Six Sigma green belt. So I'm set to go to do this interview, and they have it set up where basically I'm going to meet every single professor on that supply chain management team for TCU. And it's going to start at lunch. They bought my lunch, and I met 2 professors there. And then I went back to the campus. And well, first I guess they had contacted, they had a little aside, like they had contacted the hiring manager, who was the chair over that department. And he had me go to HR and set up all my benefits and everything like that with them, just pre-set it up so they could just turn it on. And then from there, I met every other professor on the team over the next 4 hours or 3 hours or so, from like 1 to 4. And then after that, I took about a half an hour break, went up to a classroom. And then all of the people I'd met all that day were all assembled in that classroom, all the other professors and the chair who I hadn't met up to that point. And I gave a class, and they watched how I gave a class, and I went through it, and they asked questions like they were students. And I went through that process. And then after that, they all left and gave me high fives and everything. And then I sat down with the hiring manager, who was the chair of that department. And then we did our interview. After all of that, we did our interview, and several times in the interview, he said, when you come on, I mean, if I can't say when, but you have to wait till you're on ground. I can't hire you till you're physically on ground here, blah, 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 blah. And generally, I get it. Any interview is an interview, but this one seemed a little more solid, like more solid. I mean, my benefits were set up. Like all I had to do was come up and show I'd chosen which,
and they actually made you work already.
Yeah. They showed me my office. This is where your office is going to be. This is where you park. I'm like, okay, and I went back, like, generally, I get it. You do interview, you don't know. They make decisions are made. But this one just seemed a lot more solid. So I finished up my time there and went back to Alaska to close out, thinking, wow, I normally don't try to assume on any interview. You never know how good or bad you do, whether it matters, right? But this one, I really felt like this is different. And the timing of it, we're already looking at moving here. In fact, after that interview, we went on with our real estate agent and lined up everything to get a house. So we had a house. We're in the process of doing the purchasing, put our earnest money down and everything. So, okay, this is our sign. We're set up. And so that's what's going to happen. It's all boom, boom, boom. And there's my job. It's all set up for me. So that's that interview you're talking about. That's kind of the background for it.
Man, 6-hour interview, and they made you teach on top of that.
Yeah. So I had to put together the class in the hotel room too, right?
That's just crazy.
Yeah.
I just, I'm a little bit old school like you are, and I remember, like, with McDonald's interview, if it was 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
And
at McDonald's, it's like, are you going to show up if we call you? You're going to come in. I mean, we're all teenagers, we're figuring this out.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just crazy. It's interesting how things have progressed from like a 5-minute interview to half a day.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's something. So, you talk about these things in your book, and the struggles with finding a job, and then, you kind of progress and you talk about teaching from full-time down to part-time, but you said something interesting in there. And I think this is where we all can kind of start to relate, because these things happen in our lives. You talk about how you felt, right? And you said, and this is what I want to kind of talk about, knowing and feeling are not always the same, right? So we know something, right? We try to stay positive or whatever, but because this thing happened to us, we've got this feeling inside of us that just, I don't know, it won't go away. It takes a while to shake, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about that and that struggle that you went through and how you got out of it.
Well, that's, and it is so true, right? When you know that you're going, that, okay, I know I'm supposed to be here. I just, there were several other things that happened before we left, and other things, other signs, other cues. And of course, my wife is a strong believer, and she knows, we were both there. This is where we're supposed to be. But things didn't work out. And, in the story, I'll explain about what happened with TCU there. But, that I had, you get a little, further down the road with something like that happened that way, to the point where you feel like, oh, I don't want to get, ahead of myself, but I feel like I've got this. I can see how everything I can see, which, we can't see. We don't know what's on the other side of that door. We can't see. We don't know tomorrow. We don't know. We basically, what we know, this is what we know. We know what's happening to us now. And the only thing we can control is how we react to what something happens to us, right? That's what we can control. We can't control anything else. But so often that we kind of get ahead of, what's going on, what is supposed to come out of this. And so we know, okay, I know I'm supposed to be here. I know how other things happen to get me here, and all those different things. But, you start doubting. You start wondering, did I miss something? I mean, what was I supposed to be here now? Maybe I was supposed to come here, but later, or maybe I was supposed to come earlier. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was my timing of it, or, maybe it was my decisions when you start looking for work, and maybe I should have taken this job or that job, or, whatever it is. Right. And so that's the feeling of doubt, the feeling of, sadness, disappointment, as I mean, any person, not a man or a woman, but, I'm a provider for my family. It's, and I want to take care of my family, and I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it properly right now. And what am I doing wrong? What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? In these decisions, you're kind of looking at it. And like I did mention earlier, it's important. We should never stop, but there's a period sometimes where you need to pause, because you have to take, you have to take an investigation, an inventory of what's going on. But then as you start to move forward, you also have to be careful, not to just take every road that comes, every possibility that happens. You have to be careful about that too, that you're going kind of the path you should be going. And when you start moving forward, it's not just moving forward, just moving. It's moving forward with a purpose. You're heading towards somewhere. When you start to drive, you don't just drive any direction. If I'm driving to Minnesota, I'm going to live in Texas. I'm going to drive north. I'm moving.
North on 35, you know where you're going.
Yeah, right. That's right. 35, straight up, right? But I would just say, I'm gonna move, and then I'll just get on a road and go. Right. If it's an even number road, it goes east-west, you're on the wrong road, if you're trying to go north. Right. So, I mean, so that's kind of the thing that I recite, like, I mentioned, for me, my dissertation was about servant leadership. And one of my things about Jesus was not only, the spiritual nature of him, but him as the man. He's he's the original servant leader. He's the first leader in history to ever say, for you to really properly lead your people, you need to serve them. And
That's right.
kind of a very contrary talk. No one says that. And just my dissertation and my study of servant leadership is another thing, that we need to learn. Well, what we have to learn when it comes to, these moves, if you trust God, if that's, the way that you're moved, to a direction, you also got to remember you're not completely in control. You make decisions, but you need to back off and say, okay, now where should I go next? And then so oftentimes, like, we're human. So when things are going bad, we feel bad. When they're going good, we feel good. And we have to just get out of that feeling bad when things are going bad. One of the things that really encouraged me, I mentioned in the story, was my wife was strangely happy, when all these bad things happened to me, and it was not my own doing and my own mistake. It's just things just weren't happening that, my wife started getting excited because she says, that means something's going to happen, and getting that, grabbing that attitude with that idea is really a great thing,
Yeah.
and that's why I appreciate it. That's one of my biggest blessings, of course, in life is my relationship with Jesus Christ, but also my wife, because she's a strong believer and she helps me so many times.
Well, we need those women in our lives, and
Absolutely,
and other people, right? And
yeah.
we
need each other.
Exactly. And what you were saying, I mean, a lot of things were resonating with me, and you and I think grew up very much alike, where as men especially, a lot of pressure's put on us because we are supposed to be those providers. We are supposed to do all of these things and take care of our family and act a certain way. And it's so then we're doing all we can, right? And then we get stuck, and it's like, well, why can't I do this? What's going on? And then that's where we need to learn to lean on God, right? That's where we need to learn to give up some control, let go and let God.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
And it's hard, especially like myself. I'm a type A personality. I like to be in control. Right. And being a military guy, because again, I had a master sergeant for a father. I was still, I served.
Right.
You're supposed to do certain things, and when it's not in your control, that feeling you get, especially, it's like, what do I do? Right. And
right.
you might lose hope. You might be a little discouraged, all kinds of different things, so knowing then, that you got a good support system, you got a good wife, right? She's seeing things differently. It gives you hope, right? And then stuff starts turning around, right? And that's the thing that we've just got to learn to sometimes step back from a situation, take a different perspective on it,
right?
And then we can regroup. So that's good. I like this quote in your book at the end here. It says, "Success is never final, and failure is never fatal." It's the courage to continue that counts, and that was by Winston Churchill. Right. I mean, he was awesome, right?
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
Oh, well, it's funny. I love that quote. And as a professor, I always look for opportunities to encourage my students. So I just did some research. What can I tell them? I have these phone calls with Western Governors University, and where I'll meet with students and we'll go over their course. At my particular course, one of the courses two of the courses I lead are bigger. Two of the bigger courses as far as the amount of information they need to take in, and supply chain management, one at the graduate level, one at the undergraduate. And so sometimes students will come in to that and they're kind of wallowing around and just, struggling a little bit and just need to get that focus. And so just doing a search of different quotes, and I came across that one by Winston Churchill. And, and if I'm a big, history buff, I love, military, of course, and my father was a history buff. So the history, that would be another individual, that you talk about who would you like to meet, and Winston Churchill, what he did. I mean, he really, and some could say he saved the world, of what he did and how he stood up so strong like he did. And the Battle of Britain.
They didn't lose hope. That was, if anything, like in the show, right, with Get Motivated and stuff, and I just talked about Winston Churchill kept the British people going. He was like not allowing them to lose hope, right? He wasn't letting them get into despair. He said, we're going to keep pressing on. I mean, some of the things that they did, keeping storefronts, visible and open after bombings and all kinds of different stuff. And it was so they just didn't lose that hope, right? And it was also kind of a gesture to the Germans too, right? But that's the thing, because they couldn't take the island, and
right.
I think that was, in a sense, a really turning point for the war, because they just wouldn't give up.
Absolutely. Well, and so as we were talking, I just brought one up, and this is like a longer one from Winston Churchill, but he said, this is the lesson: never give in, never give in, never, 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 in nothing, great or small, large or petty. Never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And I was like, wow, isn't that good? And really, the Germans and of World War II and early, the mid to late 1930s had developed this, their Luftwaffe and their Blitzkrieg techniques were new warfare never done before. Their overwhelming power. I mean, they took all those countries in Europe with ease. They were just completely overwhelmed, in them. And so the only last remaining free country in Europe was England, and was Great Britain. And they did have that water, but I mean, if you remember you talked about how just a little twist here, and it changes. Well, about the Battle of Dunkirk and how, for whatever reason, the Germans could have just kept pushing, but they paused. They waited. They okay, let me just get everybody together, and then we're just going to do the final push to crush them, right? Instead of just keep doing it, and they would have wiped them out. They had pinned the entire British army almost, so like 3/4 of them were pinned down, and because of that delay, Great Britain was able to get all those civilian people with their boats, just every boat they could get, and save the majority of them. That was basically, they could have wiped out the British army in that battle.
It's amazing how those little turns of events.
Why did they wait? Why did they just keep pushing? And
God, I don't know, right? Somebody was playing.
Right, exactly. And so that was before, of course, the Battle of Britain and all that kind of thing. But just little things like that in history that changes everything. Like, oh, they should have, they could have done that, and had they just kept going, but they stopped. For some reason, they stopped. And
I think that's a good word for us today, right? That like your thing where you stop digging.
Right.
And it's like, you're going through the stuff in your life. It happens, right? You don't know what little twists and turns of events is going to happen, but don't stop. Don't stop. Keep pressing on. You're going to get a breakthrough. You just got to change that mindset, change that mentality that you have about woe is me. I'm in despair. I've lost all hope, right? Or whatever it is. There's hope. right?
Yes.
There is something that's good that's going to come out of this. We don't see that when it's happening, right? But we just got to know that something good and something better is right around the corner.
Right.
There's going to be
That's
that
so true.
pause in the war, and that's going to make all the difference.
That's going to be the opening, right? And
Yep.
I like we talk about when we press, like for instance, like in my case, my story, but I have other stories, that'll show up in my book of other kind of situations of dealing with things. But in this particular case, was like, okay, now you've moved here, you've got the house here, and you can't get work. We could press to the point where you just apply to every single job, every single store down the street. Just stop and go to everyone. And what happens there is part of in your professional life, if you have this job, you need to kind of guard your resume. And I think that's kind of true for life as well, right? When you guard your resume, it's nothing. It's completely respectful to say be a McDonald's manager or to work at McDonald's or to work at those places. But once you're at a certain type of job for your career, and you have a career mode. For me, it was logistics managers, maybe managers in relating to operations, or of course my professor jobs, things like that. So it wasn't necessarily open for me to just do everything out there. So even then, but I didn't stop. I mean, I've submitted 25, 30 resumes, and I'm out there on the Indeed and all the different sites. So I never stopped, doing it. And then over time, you would still do something like for professors, you would get secure an adjunct, which is a part-time professor job, which kind of gives you that covering of working in your field, although it doesn't pay much, but it gives you that covering. So then you could do other things that make money, and you're still kind of guarding your resume, if you will. And so
Yep.
it's focused. Your effort is focused. You're moving forward, but again, if I want to go to Minnesota, I don't get on Interstate 20. I have to get on the right way, right? You have to go
Right.
that right direction. So anyway, yeah, I'm inspired to, I know personally one of the authors, on here, Trunis Goggins, and I know some of his stories, and his stories is just, it's a tearjerker. It's really good. And I know some of the other people that I've met over in our meetings and things like that for the anthology. So it's going to be, I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to getting to my copy.
Yeah, it's coming. And so we've been talking about our triumphant stories. Again, I encourage everybody out there that's listening to go get the book. It's full of all these different kinds of stories of life happening, right? And how people got out of that situation. And that's what's so important. We all need that hope, that encouragement. And sometimes we just need, somebody else's plan, and to run with it and to go somewhere that, we wouldn't necessarily have gone, or, take that chance, right? And step out of the boat like Peter did, right? And
right.
Life's going to change. You might sink a little bit, but there's someone to hold on to. And so that's what we got to know and understand. I appreciate you, David, or should I say Professor David?
Oh, yeah. David. I say you can call me Dr. David. Just don't call me late for lunch.
There you go. But in closing, if there's anything you want to share about how people get a hold of you, or what you do, or anything like that, this is your time.
Terrific. Okay, well, my email is dr.daveammons16 so that's dr.daveammons16 And one of the things, here's an interesting thing, and you'll see this story in the book, so look for this number, 413-828-3676. 3725. That's my number. And that number will show up in the book. I was able to get that number as we're prepping for this, so I can set my contact information up. I was able to get that number. So I'm so excited about that, because we'll see that number. Yeah, right. When you read my story, you'll see that number, 413.
I almost wanted to call it
3725. And that is that's my point of contact number. And there's a story behind it. That's in my story. And my story, the title of my story is "The Will of God Will Not Move You, Where His Grace Will Not Protect You." And so that's part of what my story is about. And I'm appreciative of having this opportunity to be able to share. It's always a blessing to hear these stories, but it's also like it's a blessing to tell your story, and hopefully, like I said, maybe you've never been exactly like you've never moved, or you don't have planning on moving, whatever. Take out of it, just the situation of, something happening, like I mentioned with a woman in her miscarriage, and how she dealt with the tragedy, right? Yeah. And how she dealt with it. I'll never deal directly with something like that, but how she dealt with the tragedy is something that we can grow from. And I hope that, as you see my story and some of the other stories throughout the Triumphant, you're going to see it's going to be something for you. It's something there for everyone. So I encourage all of you to go out and get your copy of the book. And I thank you, Donato, for having me on here.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, David. I appreciate you, man. And again, everybody out there, get a copy of the book, and most importantly, find something, right, to get a hold of, to get motivated. And until next time, be blessed.
Follow Donato on Facebook and LinkedIn at Donato Parisi, or go to donatomotivates.com. Remember, you can be anything you want and desire. All you have to do is get motivated.